It's time for the Double Stop with Brian Sword. Welcome to the Double Stop. I'm Brian Sword. This week I have an interview with Paul Gilbert. Obviously somebody I've wanted to have on the show since the very beginning. Now before we get going, I should note that I had a really specific amount of time allotted for this interview and about 1,000 questions, so you can really hear me rushing through to try to get in as much as I could. But I'm really pleased with the interview and how it came out. So hopefully I can get him on again down the line so I can continue to pick his brain. Okay, let's jump right into it. Here is my conversation with the great Paul Gilbert.
I'll make my future.
I was born in Illinois, but I primarily grew up in Pennsylvania. And my uncle was and still is an amazing guitar player. And my parents didn't play instruments, but they had a really great record collection and had music playing all the time. So that got me into the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Animals. And my dad had records by Muddy Waters and John Lee Hooker and B.B. King. And they also had a lot of classical music. So I had Mozart and Bach and Beethoven in my ears as well.
And when did you start picking up the guitar?
I tried when I was 6. I started taking some guitar lessons then, but it was sight reading. And that, to this day, remains an excruciating process for me. So I actually gave up and started taking drum lessons, and that was sight reading as well. So I gave that up too. And then I just did air guitar for about 3 years, which I wouldn't underestimate the power of air guitar. I think it got me comfortable with listening and moving and just visualizing what it was to be a guitar player.
Did you use a tennis racket?
Yeah, and I had the guitar that I took lessons with.
Oh, right, of course.
And I also had a kind of pretty cool looking toy electric guitar. It didn't make any sound, but it just looked cool. And then when I was 9, I started playing by ear. And that was a pretty slow process because I didn't have any idea what I was doing. But it was a beginning, and I practiced every day, and I've been playing every day since.
And when you started playing by ear, was it a bit of did you become that obsessive kid right away, or was it a bit of a slow build?
I was pretty serious about it. Now, keep in mind, I had wanted to be a guitar player when I was 6, so I felt that I had procrastinated until I was 9, and I thought I'd better get on it. I spent 3 years just messing around with this, in front of the mirror stuff. So I got to get serious. So I had enough self-discipline to play for an hour a day, and that was a lot of self-discipline because there wasn't a lot I could play in an hour. I mean, I just played the same 2 riffs that I knew over and over again, and it wasn't really fun other than I could feel that I was getting more comfortable with it, and my ear was getting better, and finally after about a year or 2, things started to get easier, and the progress started to go a lot faster, and that was really inspiring. To know that, man, I can play something that I could not play an hour ago, and that really kept me going.
And when did these bands start for you?
I joined my first band when I was about 11, and we played in the drummer's basement and did covers of Beatles and Steve Miller, and we tried to do some Van Halen, but the drummer couldn't get the drum fills right, so I quit that band. And then it was sort of on and off. I was always looking for the best musicians I could find in the little town I was from, and I would say the first really, the band that sounded like a band. I was probably 14 years old. I found a pretty good drummer who could sing, and a bass player, and we did a lot of UFO and Alice Cooper and AC/DC, and we ended up adding, getting more tricky with, we ended up getting another drummer who could play Rush. So we did a lot of Rush.
Wow.
Van Halen and UFO and Triumph and April Wine. And so, just a lot of covers. And I wrote some original stuff, and but I didn't really write a decent song until I was probably in my in my 20s. Although the Racer X stuff was for that style was kind of cool. So maybe I should say until I was about 17 or 18.
So let's jump into the GIT experience? Because I talked to Bruce Bouillet a while ago, and he made it clear that when he went to school, you were already the guy there. So, what was the process like of getting into that school, and how did you like the experience of being there?
Oh, it was great. Now I had, again, I was in a small town in Pennsylvania growing up, and my mom, as I was about to graduate, she was like, "Well, Paul, let's start looking at universities." So she took me down to the, chemistry lab at Johns Hopkins, and I'm just thinking, no, this I can't do this. So I found a little ad in the guitar magazine for GIT, and I showed it to my parents, and they knew I was serious about guitar. I mean, I was just a fanatic, putting every spare moment I could, and I was playing in bands, and so they could tell I was serious. And I'd already been featured in Guitar Player magazine and Mike Varney's Spotlight column, so you know, and Mike had already expressed interest in recording me. So there was, I think they knew it was more than a just a little passing interest. So my grandma paid the tuition, and I went out to GIT, and it was at the time it was just a 1 year course. So I went for that year, and my playing was already very developed, but I didn't really have much music theory knowledge, and there were certainly a lot of things about music that I was unaware of. So it really opened my ears, and taught me a lot of new technique stuff, and it was a fantastic year and very inspiring. And but at the time, the 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 trend really was like Van Halen and Yngwie, and heavy metal shred was being born. And most of the teachers at MI were more into either traditional jazz or fusion or blues, and so they just needed teachers to do that, and that was my thing. So and I think I had a decent personality for teaching as well. I was relatively patient and communicative. So and plus they knew I could get up early in the morning, because I'd always get up early to rehearse, because you could grab a good rehearsal room in the morning. So they hired me as a teacher, and I taught for about 2.5 years before Mr. Big got so busy on the road that I had to had to leave on a bus.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know you were still teaching when you were starting on Mr. Big.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed it, and I mean, Mr. Big, we didn't. With any band, you don't get paid until you've been until the record's been out a while. So,
Yeah, fair enough.
so you got to pay rent somehow.
I'm very curious about that experience in the studio for you for that first record. You'd done a few Racer X records before, but this is a bit on a different level. How was that experience for you to go in on that band?
Well, it was. I was worried, and I went to the producer. I said, "Are we going to be okay? This is taking a lot of time." Because with Racer X, we did the first album in I think less than a week, and the other one was like a grand, almost 10 days or something to do the second one, including mixing and everything. And the first Mr. Big album, I think we spent maybe 5 weeks or something. I can't remember exactly, but it was a much longer amount of time. And with all the Racer X albums, we'd do all the drums in a day, and then the guitars, we'd do all the rhythms in 4 hours, and then it was really quick. And so with Mr. Big, I was just almost in a panic, like, are we going to run out of time? We should have all the drums done by now. And the producer's like, no, it's okay, we got time. And so it was funny because it's because we were spending all this time mixing and doing the background vocals and everything. There was a lot of downtime for me where I'm just waiting for the producer to call us in to approve a mix. And so actually that was the album where I learned how to play piano,
Oh, wow.
because there's just so much time. There was a really nice Steinway there. So it's like, I got to stick around the studio in case, I get called in to listen to a mix, but what else am I going to do? So, I'd actually learned a lot of piano songs and put them on my guitar, and I just sat down with the piano and started putting them back. and so by the end of that record, I could play piano pretty well.
Amazing. And what did you think when Billy contacted you about this band? What was your first thought?
I was extremely excited because Billy was a huge hero of mine. I used to go watch him when he was in the band Talus, and I sneak into clubs all the time when I was a kid, and listen. Talus was a great band, and I'd try to steal what he did on bass and put it on guitar. So it was a huge honor to play with one of my heroes, and we knew each other because I had actually opened up for him once in my cover band in Pennsylvania, and then when Billy came out to LA for the David Lee Roth band, it was around the same time I came up to GIT and was doing Racer X. So Billy used to stop in when he would do a seminar at GIT or BIT, and he'd just show up where I was in the room where I was teaching, and be like, "Hey, let's jam," and the students would get a free little concert of Billy and me jamming on Accept songs, and I think that's actually what impressed Billy about I think the reason he wanted me in the band was not just that I could play, but I knew a lot of the same music that he knew, and that's really sort of the common language. I think for a lot of musicians is do you know the same copy songs? And Billy and I, we can sit down and play anything from Beatles to Judas Priest to Accept, and we know the deep album cuts and AC/DC. So that's that was really our common bond.
That actually really fills a hole for me because it's always been something I've wondered about is on paper, this guy from Racer X, this shredder, joining a 70s influenced band, on paper that shouldn't work, but it works so well. And knowing that Billy knew this other side to your playing in advance, that makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, and I mean, and you have to say, I mean, at that time, Billy was pretty firmly planted in the shred world.
Oh, very much. Yeah.
I think if anything, the thing that might have seemed odd was having Eric Martin, who's like an R&B singer,
Yeah.
and or a soul singer, but I was really into Eric's voice. I already had some of his solo records, and so to me, I thought it would be great to have him in the band, and it was a really good combination. I mean, that's the place where heavy metal sort of took a turn from blues and soul is sort of the place where I left, got off the train anyway. So, I really could always relate to what Eric was doing.
Now, for the second record, there's two things that really struck me about it. Is one, there's a definite difference in the sound. It's a bit more, I would say, aggressive. And two, you start seeing songs like Green Tinted 60s Mind, where it's, a Paul Gilbert written song complete, which I don't think really happened in the first record. Can you fill in that for me in terms of the transition from the first record to the second?
Well, we had toured a lot, and we had some great tours. We had opened for Rush on arena tours, and so we had really had a chance to test out the first album in every possible venue, from a club to an arena, and I felt we were going over okay, but I just felt like, man, we just need songs that are melodically stronger, and that'll make a big difference in connecting with the audience. And so I really went into the writing of Lean Into It with melody and attractive chord changes as a big priority, whereas the first one was more kind of like, let's kick ass, and if it's just sort of a blues, exciting blues, hard rock version of that's fine. So I think I turned up the pop knob a lot on from my own writing, and I sort of responded positively to Eric's contributions there with songs like Just Take My Heart and To Be With You. And To Be With You was a song that Eric had years before, but I don't think it ever occurred to him to even have it Mr. Big do it. I think Eric's, the way he perceived Mr. Big was like, oh, they would go, those guys wouldn't like that song. And but he knew I was a Beatles fan, so he played it for me one day, and I thought, man, that was great. And I actually, just from my own listening enjoyment, I asked him, I said, can you send me a cassette of that tune? And I was the one who would always make the band rehearsal cassettes. At the end of rehearsal, I'd have dubbing deck, and I'd run off cassettes for everybody to listen to what we had written. And one day I just sort of secretly put that song on the end, and my phone starts ringing a couple hours later. Everybody's like, hey, what's that song at the end? That's awesome. And so, Eric had sort of misjudged our taste. He always thought Billy and I were just like only metal guys. And we're here going like, Eric, that pop song you wrote is awesome. Let's do that. And so obviously that heading in that direction was really beneficial for us. That was a career-changing song, and that tour, we could really feel that connection happen a lot more. I think just there was an upgrade in songwriting.
And of course, grunge hits and for the third record, but you still came through that period, I think, a lot better than most bands because you had some success on that record when everybody else was really struggling.
Well, we also had a lot of success internationally. I mean,
Oh yeah, very much. Yeah.
Japan just kept getting bigger and bigger to the point where I didn't even my expectations for America just sort of died away. I thought, well, we've got so much going on internationally that's, this is enough. We continued to play in Japan. Indonesia somehow became huge. The Wild World was just giant over there, and Europe was pretty good. And it actually it was years later. It was amazing to me to sort of make a comeback when I was on the G3 tour with Joe Satriani and to play in America again, and be able to speak into the microphone and know that people are going to understand what I'm talking about.
Just to finish up on Mr. Big, so you do Hey Man, and then after that tour, you decide to leave the band. What happened at that point to make you feel that that was the right time for you to go?
Oh, we were pretty dysfunctional at that point. I mean, and it's almost impossible not to be. If you could take four of the nicest guys in the world, which I mean, Mr. Big really is good people, and make them live in a bus. It's basically you're living in a tin can for 8 years, and it's going to drive anybody crazy. I've actually heard that when they're talking about sending people to Mars, one of their biggest worries is like the astronauts not driving each other crazy because they're just in this confined space. So anyway, it was a bit of that, and also I had the harebrained scheme of being a lead singer and having a pop career in Japan because I was getting more and more into pop music and getting into my roots as a Beatles fan, and I found that what I was listening to was much less metal and much more sort of what do you call it? When pop gets loud, there's some name for it, I can't remember. Well, there's power, but that's like the Knack,
Power pop or something.
But when they punk pop, that was
Sure.
like Green Day, that kind of stuff. I was, and
Oh, okay.
so
Yeah.
I thought I could do that kind of thing, and actually in Japan it did all right. But looking back at it now, I don't know. I think I thought I was a better singer than I was. So my apologies. Um,
Well, King of Clubs. That's I got that record right when it came
Thank
out,
you.
and it's
And
super
and
fun. It's a fun record.
those were as a musician, it feels very good to be able to express what you're feeling, and that's where I was at the time. So it would have been very frustrating to not be able to get those songs out because those were where I was, and I felt a lot of what I was doing with Mr. Big at that point was becoming different than what I was really into. So, there's certainly as a musician, you don't always have that luxury of going like, oh, today I'm going to follow my whim this way, and have the audience accept it. I mean, sometimes you just got to do your job, and hey, this is my brand, and I got to stay true to it. So I'm really fortunate to have been able to follow my whim, pretty much my whole career. So I have to thank the audience for following me on these rabbit holes that I go down.
Now, for that record, if I recall correctly, did you originally lay down the drums
Yeah,
yourself
I've
and
been
then decide
practicing
to
drums
switch
a
it out
lot,
later in the process?
and I'm actually probably a better drummer than I'm a singer. But in order to really play drums on an album, you have to have a certain level of timing, and I started when I started tracking it. I would listen back and go, "Oh no, it's just that little bit off that that thing that a pro drummer has that a guitar player playing drums, you know, I just I would need to put in 3 years to really get the muscles together. So 3 months wasn't enough. So I had Pat Torpy and Jeff Martin come in, and they saved it.
Now, very quickly after that, you decided to get heavy again and reformed Racer X.
Yeah.
How did that come together again?
That's, I think I mean, I can't remember what form of, if we were still using the phone then, or if emails were floating around, but somehow I contacted John Olderetti and Scott Travis, and we just had the idea that it would be fun to play. And there's a certain, I mean, the thing about heavy metal is it's an extreme kind of music. It's athletic and it's loud, and you're really pushing, you're pushing the extremes of things. And there's a certain thing that I really enjoy about that, and I hadn't done that in a while, in a way. So I sort of, I felt up to the challenge. Like, okay, let's see if we can make a metal record. Something that's loud and fast, and that sounded like a fun thing to do. So that's what we did.
And it was a pretty big burst there for a few years of a lot of Racer X stuff, and then you moved on again. Do you ever see a time when you're going to get the itch to reform that band?
Oh, well, I always like working with the guys because they're just we've got a pretty deep friendship. That was the band it kind of put us all on the map together. We turned it from nothing into something. For me, the biggest challenge is the writing, because I really don't listen to. I'm not a heavy metal listener anymore. I mean, I've still got that as part of my DNA as a teenage heavy metal listener. But if you saw what I listen to now, I mean, I listen to like old Loretta Lynn records, and, old classical music and old jazz saxophone solos from I love Duke Ellington, the sax player. So I don't really sit up and crank up the Judas Priest anymore. And so I'd have to sort of get myself in that mode just to write it. And so when I sit down with a guitar, it's just not the first thing I play. So I'd have to find some sort of thing that would inspire me. I'm 49 years old, so I'm not quite as physically energetic as I used to be. So that's the challenge. Is like, do I really want to push those extreme limits anymore, or do I want to like sit back and just play a beautiful note?
Yeah.
So I just got to find a way to get myself interested.
And in terms of your solo records from that period, you did a bunch of vocal records, and then you started doing some instrumental stuff. And it seemed like you mentioned a G3. North America really seemed to take notice again. What was the big shift there with the instrumental stuff?
Well, I would have to say Europe as well. It was when I started. Really, it was the first time I had toured outside of Japan as a solo artist, or and Asia. Because I'd done Indonesia and Thailand and places like that. And so it was so heartwarming to be able to come to America and to Europe and to have good audiences to play for and good response. And it's funny because it's really sort of branched off into me having to almost be two different people. Because in America and in Europe, I'm pretty well received as an instrumentalist, and not so much as a singer. And in Japan, they still want me to sing, because the solo stuff did well, or the vocal stuff did well over there. Where if I go there, like, what's he doing with all this instrumental stuff? So it's actually a lot of work to have like these two separate careers. At some point, I'm probably just going to have to put my foot down and go like, I don't care if we'll just let the career goes where it goes. I've just got to do what I like. And that's kind of what I do anyway. But it's interesting to feel the magnetic pull of different audiences, and one wants one thing, one wants another, and you can't help but be influenced by that.
Now, I've talked to Eric and Billy about one particular show that I was fortunate enough to attend, and it was a big one. I was at the LA Guitar Generations show, where Pat and Billy came out and played a song with you, which was the kind of beginning of the reunion. Can you tell me what you recall about that night and how special that was?
It was great to. We hadn't played together in a long time, and so just musically it felt great to play, and at the same time the audience went nuts. So
did we ever?
Yeah, so it was fantastic, and that absolutely was the seed of like, wow, this could be really fun to do this again.
obviously the reunion happened. You've done a couple of records and lots of success and a lot of North American touring, which has been really great.
Yeah.
Especially on the first reunion record. I think I've seen some dates start popping up again for the fall. Is there any big Mr. Big plans?
Well, I think it might just be a few because I'm actually doing a lot of solo touring this fall.
Oh, great.
But possibly next year. So, that's it's. I mean, it's always Mr. Big has such a good following that it's always rewarding not only to play with Billy and Eric and Pat and Matt, who's Matt Starr is starting to help us out, but also just to music joins people together, and you have that when you play those old songs and the people who grew up with that stuff come out, it just feels great. So it's really an amazing bit of luck to have been in a band that really put a stamp on an era, and I mean, we can always go back and play those songs and have a guaranteed following of people that love the stuff. So that's really a blast.
Okay, let's jump into the new record, I Can Destroy, which is awesome. I've listened to it quite a few times already. I think for me, it's just, I enjoy the blend of styles. It's more than one. You don't hear the first song and know what the whole album's going to be.
Yeah.
And on this one, you worked with Kevin Shirley again, who you worked with on the What If album.
Yeah.
And he's got a very particular style of recording. Did you do that on this one as well, where you did all the bed tracks live and then did as few overdubs as possible?
Absolutely. And I really enjoyed working with Kevin on the What If record. And so, this was my first time to work with him as a solo artist, and I knew I'd better be prepared because
yeah.
If I go in and I want to fix everything and want to do lots of overdubs, it's just not going to happen. So the first thing I did is I thought I've got to have a band that enables me to deliver a pretty much finished, produced sound, in one take. Where there's enough musicians and the quality musicians to just have one take sound like a finished production. And so I asked two friends of mine that not only play guitar but also sing really well, Tony Spinner and Freddie Nelson. And I've recorded a lot with both of them. I did a record with Freddie called United States that turned out really good. And Tony's done a lot of recording with me over the years. And both those guys, are much better singers than I am. So it was really an honor to have them sort of support me while I'm squeaking out a lead vocal. And then they're great guitar players as well. So it influenced my writing because I suddenly realized that I've got the ability to do like triple harmonies and on both voice and guitar. And so, it led me to come up with a lot of melodic things where, normally I might have, just gone, okay, just, do a little shred and then get into the song. And so it made me compose a bit more and plan out those harmonies more. And I think that actually improves the songwriting to have that lineup. And then we went in and just did it super quick. And, it's all the musicians were kind of blown away because it was, I worked with Kevin before, but the other guys hadn't. And they all kept, it was like a mantra. They all kept going like, we should always record like this. Why, because Pro Tools, I don't know how long that's been around, but it's been around long enough where, just everybody gets into the mindset of, you can do 70 takes and edit and if you work on a song, it's, one song takes a week and we were doing 2 songs a day and, with everything, done, so it's, it's really a rewarding process and the result is you get something that has a humanness to it, and for better or for worse. I mean, again, you've got to have you got to be prepared. You got to have your shit together, and so we that's led me to putting the best band I could together and rehearsing and trying to get it right.
It definitely seems like a love it or hate it situation, one or the other. It's going to be extreme feelings either way.
Well, there's sometimes you have like, I mean, all it does is inspire you to be together. Because if you it sort of comes down to if something wasn't right, whose fault is it? It's my fault. I should have prepared that solo. And and then there were a couple times. There was, what was the song? There was a song called "My Sugar," which is actually was like the bonus track on the Japanese version, and the chord changes were tricky, and and it was a song that well, I hadn't actually even planned on doing, but we were working so quickly that we had recorded all the other songs and we had some extra time. So I said, well, I got this one, and I hadn't had time to work out a solo for it. And Kevin did give me like 20 minutes to work something out. And then it's like, are you ready yet? And like, okay. And then I played it, and the first take was the one. So that was the one time where I actually like did an overdub. but but all the other stuff was pretty much live with the band. What happens happens.
The song "I'm Not the One Who Wants to Be With You," obviously when I heard that I started laughing out loud,
Yeah.
because how can you not? So what was, obviously, it's a playoff of the biggest hit you've ever been involved in your life. So what made you want to put that on the record? And just, can you just tell me about the writing of that song?
Well, the my record company guy in Japan, who I love, he's responsible for the huge part of my career. Um, he got the idea to have Eric Martin, the Mr. Big singer, sing on a couple tracks on my album. And I love working with Eric, but I was like, this is my solo album. I'm supposed to be the one in front. And it ended up not happening because Eric was on tour, and it wouldn't have worked just due to the scheduling. But there was a day when I was like, okay, I don't this it just doesn't feel right to me, because it's my record. But at the same time, I do like working with Eric, and also my record company guy is pretty much always right. So I've got to like consider the idea. And in the process of considering the idea, it inspired two songs. One was "I'm Not the One Who Wants to Be With You," which was just me being cynical and funny, and the other one was a song called "Love We Had," which is a much more heartfelt song, and it was inspired by the times that I had with Eric and Mr. Big, where we had we had this career together and we achieved things together that I'm pretty sure we'll never achieve in the rest of our lives. That was such a golden time of playing these, selling out the Budokan 3 nights in a row, number one hits, platinum albums, and and having that experience together. That was something really unique, and I sort of expanded that and made the metaphor of a relationship where you know maybe your first love, you can go on, you'll have other relationships and they're great, but there's nothing's quite like that first one. And so I was actually in the end really happy that my record company guy had brought that up, just because I got two great songs out of it. And I'd love to hear Eric sing on either one of those. So the door is still open, and I know he was into it. He was like, man, I'd love to, but I'm on tour. So I think, but it would be really funny to hear Eric sing "I'm Not the One Who Wants to Be With You," and I think he would kill on "Love We Had." That would be great to hear him do that as well.
Mr. Big's got such a big back catalog of material, but you ever think of pulling in some solo stuff like that when you do get back together with Mr. Big? Because that would be fun to hear him sing that.
It, I mean, I probably wouldn't suggest it, just because when we put the set list together, it really is like, oh man, we've got, especially with the new stuff, we got "What If," and we got the stories we could tell, and you add that to the 4 or 5 earlier records, and it's just, man, it's going to be a Bruce Springsteen 4-hour concert unless we. so,
Poor Eric.
so I don't know if there's time for that. I mean, I'd certainly be open to it, but I wouldn't suggest it.
And as we're just hit the finish line here, in terms of touring plans for this record, how does it look? You mentioned a little bit in the fall, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm just sort of my manager's just putting it together now, and it looks like I've got some stuff in Japan and Europe, and just the beginnings of South America, and hopefully the States at the end. Um, which actually be kind of a first for me. I haven't really toured except for as support for G3, and a few shows around LA. But I hope to do more touring, with my solo band in America. And of course, I'm also doing the guitar camp, the Great Guitar Escape in July.
And May 27th, I believe, is the release date for I Can Destroy in North America.
That's correct. So thanks for telling everybody.
And my one final question is, Brian from AC/DC, has been in the news with some hearing problems. And I've noticed in the last, 10 years or so, you've been very, very careful to protect your hearing. How hard is it to protect your hearing? And do you have any advice for other musicians on keeping what they got?
Well, I would say being a singer is the hardest because you can't look down at your frets in order to play in tune.
Right. Yeah.
If I'm playing a show and something's wrong with the monitors and I can't hear my guitar, I'm still going to be all right because I can I can see where the frets are and how it feels. But as a singer, you really need to hear yourself, and a lot of times that doesn't happen. You're playing it, especially if you're doing club tours and the monitors, something's up with it, and the band's really loud. And so I really think I lost a lot of hearing from my attempts at being a singer and cranking up the vocal mic and just having no other way to deal with it other than to be loud to hear yourself sing. So that's my advice there would be either don't sing or bring your own monitors out or something. Besides that. Lately, I've just been wearing earplugs, which has been great. And a lot of times, I really can't hear the band that well, and or myself. And so the solution there is I have to have a little meeting with the drummer and say, like, if I start drifting, I apologize, but you're going to have to follow me. And the main place where that happens, like the intro to the Mr. Big song, Green Tinted 60s Mind, where the featured part is my guitar part. I'm doing the it's this melody I'm playing, and behind it there's this hi-hat going, and it's actually like on the studio it's a backwards hi-hat, so the drummer's trying to do like an imitation of the backwards hi-hat, sort of and I just can't hear a hi-hat anymore. That frequency's gone. And so and the drummer used to say, like, you're going off, and I say, that's right, and I've tried to put it on my monitor, it doesn't work. Just crank me up in your monitor. I can't hear you, but you can hear me. So you're just going to have to follow. And ever since we did that, it's been perfect every night. So
amazing.
You just have to have a cooperative drummer.
It's like every guitar player's dream to have the drummer follow them.
Exactly. But I've got a good excuse. I've got a note from the doctor.
That was Paul Gilbert. I hope you enjoyed it. His new album, I Can Destroy, is available for pre-order on iTunes and Amazon, and I highly recommend you get a copy. It's probably his best vocal solo album. Official release date in North America is May 27th. Okay, that's it for the show. This is actually my last show before going on hiatus. As well as the new baby, we've actually decided to move back to Ontario at the end of May, so I've got my hands full packing up the house. I am going to try to keep on recording interviews so I have a solid bank when we do come back, but I don't expect to release any new episodes until probably July. Obviously, right now I'm struggling to hit release dates, and that's something that wasn't a problem for the first 90 episodes. I barely missed a week. So it's really time to pull the plug for a bit and come back when I can do it right. So I'll still be easy to reach, brian@thedoubletop.com, and I'll be around online. So signing off for the last time for a while, I'm Brian Sword. Thanks for listening, and you'll hear me again in July.